Okay, Big Ten preview of this past weekend's going on as our Rutgers Scarlet Knights traveled to Lincoln, Nebraska and lost to the Cornhuskers 14-7 in a very evenly matched, tightly contested game. I did a couple rants on that if you're interested in checking it out. So no more rants for at least another week. So review and preview of last week and this coming week's Big Ten action. Let's get to it. First game I watched a bit of, and that was Oregon 31, Michigan State 10. Not much of a surprise there. Michigan State, one of those teams that, they start off the game in pretty good shape, but a mistake here, penalty there, interception there. Wind up giving up the game in the second half. I watched a big chunk of that Boston College game. And that was a game that they thought they were in good position to win and did not. Aiden Chiles is struggling a bit. I'm not sure that they expected that. Michigan State, I feel you. You were 3-0, now you're 3-3. We've done a bunch of that recently with Rutgers. As soon as including that crazy Rutgers win over you guys on a rainy Saturday in Piscataway last year. And that was the one I'm sure, I watched. I'm on YouTube and I come across the Locked On Spartans podcast on YouTube. And that kind of got me, what's his name? Matt. I think his name is Matt. And the incredulity of how you guys managed to lose that game. So I feel you starting off 3-0 and now 3-3. Childs didn't have a great, he was okay, but he continues to struggle. You did get a late touchdown from a Rutgers transfer in K'Ron Lynch-Adams. He's doing pretty, he's making a bit of an impact with you guys. Good for him and good for you guys. You rushed the ball 30 times for 53 yards. That's not going to get it done in the Big Ten. On the other hand, Oregon, they run a balanced offense. They want to be able to pass for over 200, run for over 200, and usually they do a good job with that. Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma via UCF, he had 264 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. He tends to, he has high upside, but makes some mistakes. He's got 3 red zone interceptions this year. And that's not going to cut it against the Ohio States of the world, which is coming up this weekend. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Oregon did run for 213 yards in addition to Gabriel's 267 yards passing. So Oregon had that balance there now, 5-0. Michigan State 3-3. The ugly game of the day, and you kind of figured it might be considering how these teams like to play, but nonetheless, Penn State beats UCLA 27-11. UCLA scores a late touchdown to make it seem a little closer than it was. Penn State's 5-0. They were missing their number 1 running back, Nick Singleton. They only ran the ball for 85 yards. Alar passed for 237. That's kind of not what they want to do. They almost wanted the opposite. But nonetheless, when Penn State can run it and play defense and get enough passing yards, they're going to be successful. Alar was able to put some points on the board this week, and the Penn State defense did what it usually does, and that's play a solid game defensively. UCLA did get 260 yards against the number 4 in the nation Penn State defense, so it wasn't a total disaster. UCLA, we've talked about this, how unlike other Pac-12 teams in recent years, they're not that wide open offense. They've been playing defense and maybe running it a little. Pretty good recruiting classes. I guess they're having issues putting it all together and executing on the field. Nonetheless, Penn State beats UCLA 27-11. This next game, bit of a surprise. Only because Wisconsin has been waiting for a couple of years to have an offensive showing like this, especially in the passing game against another Big Ten team. Wisconsin beats Purdue 52-6. Purdue, kind of surprising. They're a little bit of a disappointment. When 1-4, we talked about how they expect to have some offensive upside. Having Hudson Card transfer in from Texas, Hudson probably would have been better off staying there and being Arch Manning's backup next season. He did go 24 for 25 against Indiana State. Nonetheless, Indiana State is not the Big Ten. He's struggling quite a bit. Braden Locke, 359 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions for Wisconsin. And they had 228 yards rushing. When you talk about this, when you have balance like that, you're a hard team to beat. Next week, they come and visit us here in Piscataway to play Rutgers. A lot of Rutgers fans think this is not the same Wisconsin team and that you can just check off the boxes and win. No sirree, Bob. This is going to be an evenly matched game, similar to Nebraska. And it's going to be a hard-fought one. 2 similar teams. We'll get to that in a bit. Nonetheless, Wisconsin's 3-2. Purdue 1-4, and it doesn't get much easier for Purdue next week. More on that in a minute. Ohio State 5-0. Number 2, or are they number 1 now? They might be number 1 now. Beats Iowa 35-7, and that's always kind of interesting because Iowa loves to play ugly, and they can drag you down, and they can pull out some wins against highly ranked teams. But when they can't get the passing game going, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Cade McNamara, 98 yards rushing, 98 yards passing, which is okay if you're running the ball for 220, 250 yards. They only ran it for 115 yards. So that resulted in a 35-7 loss. Iowa now 3-2. They'll probably be like 9-3 by the end of the year, and vying for some sort of quality bowl, maybe even some sort of Big Ten championship game. Ohio State, they're getting off the slow game. It was only 7-0 at halftime, I believe. They're getting off to slow starts this year. They were even behind Akron early. So if you're playing Ohio State, you might want to let them score a little bit so they don't blow you out in the second half. Maybe you can kind of stay in the game a bit. Ohio State, very balanced team. They're very dangerous. I'm kind of surprised at how well-balanced they are on offense and how good their defense is. It's kind of a surprise. They had over 200 yards rushing and passing, and they have a top defense. Their big challenge is next week against Oregon. I think they're the better team. We'll get to that in a minute. And then everybody's darling in the Big Ten, Indiana 41, Northwestern 24. With first-year coach Curt Cignetti, the Cignettis have ties to Rutgers. On the one hand, you're kind of rooting for him. On the other hand, you're really pissed off that in year 1, he has that program 6-0 for the first time since 1967, when I was an 8-year-old child on my way to games with Dad, watching Rutgers play Bucknell, Lehigh, Colgate, Princeton, Brown, Holy Cross, Army. Nonetheless, Indy does what they do. They're almost kind of a Pac-12, Big 12 kind of team where they want to be explosive on offense, particularly in the passing game, but they can also run it. Surprisingly, and I don't know if it's still the case after this week, they were the number 1 rushing team in the Big Ten, which was kind of a surprise. Rourke having himself a year. He was 25 of 33, 380 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, Northwestern didn't stand a chance. 150 yards rushing. Northwestern, you know what they want to do? Their model the past few years, run, play, defense, pass minimally. They're almost like a poor man's Iowa, just not as good. And, they had their off-the-field issues, so they've been struggling a bit. Their offense is like 119th in the country. They did move and here's the thing about Indiana. When you play that style of offense, you're going to be a little bit vulnerable on defense. So far, they've been able to win every game. Not sure how they would stack up against, Ohio State or even the physicality of Michigan. Nonetheless, they moved the ball decently, put up 24 points on Indiana. I'm not even sure Northwestern will get 24 points in the game the rest of the year. And on to the big upset in the Big Ten of the week. Minnesota beats USC 24-17. USC is everybody's favorite sexy Pac-12 team that was going to vie for the Big Ten championship with the top tier of the Big Ten. I felt going into the season that style of play, Lincoln Riley, wide open, Big 12, Pac-12 kind of offense, not physical enough on defense, wouldn't be able to hang with the top part of the Big Ten, even though the Big Ten, Michigan taking a step back this year. I think overall, the elite football programs are taking a step back in college football. There isn't that dominating. You saw when Vanderbilt, what they put up, 41 on Alabama, 40, 41, 42, whatever it was. I felt they could be a 493 kind of team every year, beating the middle of the pack and lower tier teams. But they lose to Minnesota. And Minnesota, a lot of people thought would be able to come back this year, be some balanced on offense and play good defense as they've done in the past to have some success this year. They score with 56 seconds left. Bosner, had 3 rushing touchdowns. He scored the winning touchdowns. He was also efficient in the passing game, 15 for 19, 169 yards. A very efficient, productive game all the way around. Beats USC. USC might have some trouble with teams that can run the ball and play physically. We saw how Michigan minimally passed the ball. And I don't know, I think had maybe 260 yards rushing to beat USC. What surprised me, we talked about Moss again, against Michigan and last week as well. 56 pass attempts. You're not going to win games like that, especially in the Big Ten. It's not the Big 12 from the 90s or the 2000s. Then he had 45 or 46 attempts last week. This week, surprisingly, he only had 38 pass attempts, 23 to 38, only 200 yards against the 81st ranked pass defense in the country. So a couple surprising things. They didn't attempt too many passes. You want to have balance so you can chew up clock, control the clock, the pace of the game. But he only had 2. So they're between a rock and a hard place. You don't want to throw the ball 56 times, but if he's only throwing it for 200 yards, that's not going to get you a win either. So they ran the ball decently well. So, maybe that's something they have to think about, obtaining some balance and going forward, having a little more synergy between the run game and the pass game. And then this last game was a game I very much was looking forward to. And not because it was the low-hanging fruit of these teams being in the national championship game last year. Washington does defeat Michigan 27-17. I was interested in this game because, Rutgers, we defeated Washington at home. And going into the year, everybody said, this Washington team's no good. They lost all these guys to the NFL. And I'm saying to myself, no, they're still have a lot of highly recruited guys on that roster. It's a matter of putting it all together and them executing on the field. Tightly contested game as I thought it would be through 3 quarters. I watched the 4th quarter of this game. Washington pulls away late. Will Rogers didn't have a dominating, air raid kind of game, but he did have 2 touchdown passes. I want to say he had like 267 yards or whatever it was. They didn't have quite as good a rushing game as they did against Rutgers, which was kind of a surprise. Coleman kind of had some big plays against us. But Michigan made the quarterback switch to Jack Tuttle. And he was, 10 for 18, 98 yards. You can get away with that in the Big Ten if you're running for 260 yards. But they only rushed for 174 yards against Washington, so that wasn't going to get it done. Washington pulls away late and pulls out a 27-17 win. Both teams, I believe, are 3-2 right now. So that was the review of this past week. Won't get into Rutgers because I've already ranted a few times about that. All right, let's preview this weekend's games. We know what the big one is. That is going to be Ohio State versus Oregon. I think Ohio State has the edge here. We'll get to that game in a minute. But first, we start off Friday night in a game that nobody is going to care about unless you're an alumni of Northwestern and Maryland. Maryland, a 10-point favorite. You know, Mike Locksley likes to play offense. They they always seem to start off the year very well. And they think, oh, this is going to be a year when, one of the new big teams does pretty well, and they wind up fading down the stretch. Nonetheless, they're on offense. They like to throw the ball. They're actually 12th in the nation. They average about 305 yards per game. Rushing, about 145. That's 29th in the country. Overall, they're like 29th in the country on offense. Their defense, pass defense is not great. They're ranked like 121st. Unfortunately for Northwestern, they don't throw the ball very well. So Maryland will kind of win the matchup there as well. Maryland's defense is very good against the run. They're ranked 33rd in the country. So if Northwestern wants to rush the ball, they run the ball for about 127 yards per game. That's 101st in the country. Overall, their offense is 119th. I don't see how they stand much of a chance. No, it's, these conference games, you have a couple teams that are, they're kind of middling to not so middling. You never know how it's going to turn out. 10-point dog, I probably wouldn't take that. Nonetheless, after this, so there's 4 undefeated Big Ten teams: Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. One of those teams will not be undefeated at the end of this week. Nonetheless, we have another kind of interesting matchup. The high-powered Washington Huskies against that rise and grind Iowa defense. I think Washington can control this game. Now, would I be shocked if it was a tightly contested game and Iowa was in it in the end? Not really, but I think Will Rogers has enough juice in the passing game, and Washington has enough of a running game with Coleman to be able to generate enough offense. Even though Iowa is opens as a 2.5-point favorite, to me, a little bit of a surprise. We know what Iowa wants to do. They have the 12th ranked rushing offense in the country, 223 yards per game. Even with that, they're still the 90th ranked offense because they just don't throw the ball very well. Sorry, Cade. I don't know. Maybe you should have been, should have stayed home. Nonetheless, defensively, Iowa's rush defense very good, 15th in the country. So if Washington has visions running Coleman against them, probably going to be a bit of a tough slog. Washington's probably going to use the pass game to set up the run. We'll see how that goes. Iowa's pass defense, it's just okay. They're ranked 65th. In the country overall, their defense is top 25. Another game that, this game probably had some juice circled on the calendar, beginning of the year. How would this new Pac-12 team stack up against the top tier of the Big Ten? USC, now 3-2, goes against 5-0 Penn State. We're ranked number 4. They might even moved up with this weekend's rankings. Nonetheless, USC, 5.5-point underdog. And we talked about how, USC, Pac-12 kind of offenses, how they tend to be finesse, but their defense is better than you think. They're 13th against the pass, and they, against the rush, I want to say they're like top 10 and 35th overall, which kind of matches up with their recruiting ranking, by the way. So they're not, then again, Minnesota and Michigan's offenses are not potent. Nonetheless, they've been getting the job done against the Big Ten teams they need to get the job done against, so we don't want to take away anything from them there. Penn State, they're just elite. They have the fourth best defense in the country. They're fifth in rush defense, only 76 yards per game. Pass defense, they're 11th. They only give up 157 yards per game, so Moss is going to have himself a game. Penn State is 5-0 and a 5.5-point favorite. That could be an interesting matchup style, see how the styles match up against each other. That could be a fun game to watch. This next one is another one that, sorry, Purdue, you're probably going to lose this one. Brett Bielema has the Fighting Illini, number 23 in the country. Playing very well. Brett Bielema is kind of meat and potatoes guy, wants to run it, wants to play defense. If you can throw it, fine. Luke Altmaier did have that really good game against Nebraska. A bit of a surprise. Luke Altmaier is kind of like Ethan Kaliakamanis from Rutgers, although Ethan did not have a Luke Altmaier kind of game against Nebraska. Game managers that were accurate. One who hit guys out in the flat, in space, can throw the ball deep accurately, have good versatility. They have good athleticism, but they don't typically run a lot, but they have that ability. So Illinois, I think, is going to be able to just have their way with Purdue on offense. Purdue's defense is ranked like 117th in the country. Terrible against the run, a little better against the pass. But as a 19.5-point favorite, you might want to lay the points in this game because Illinois' defense is also very good. They're ranked 28th in the 28th or 29th overall in the country. So if Purdue's in it, it might be that game that kind of surprises people, but this should be an easy win for the Fighting Illini. And Minnesota plays another Los Angeles team. They play UCLA, and this could win the prize as the potentially the ugliest Big Ten game of the week. Of course, Minnesota have a letdown after beating USC? Probably not. Although I keep waiting for UCLA to have that game. But they offensively, they're, I believe, 127th in the country. So even with Minnesota's decent but not elite defense, I think Minnesota is going to come out on top. I think they're just overall a more well-balanced, better team. I think Minnesota's pass defense is actually pretty good. Is Minnesota dominating in their passing game or their rushing game? Not really. I think overall Minnesota's offense is like 110th in the country. But I don't think it will matter against the UCLA team that just can't stop the run. So UCLA is a 5.5-point dog in this game. We'll see how this one goes. Of course, the big one is probably, or not probably, will be the game that determines the Big Ten champion and potential national champion. Ohio State opens as a 3.5-point favorite against Oregon, number 2 versus number 3, or it might be number 1 or number 2 now, who knows. We talk about Ohio State's balance. They're 9th overall in the country on offense, 14th in the running game, 23rd in the passing game. Average over 200 yards in each, almost 500 yards a game. Average 500 yards a game. But that alone is not what's going to make Ohio State a dangerous team. They have the #1 defense in the country. They give up 73 yards rushing per game. That's third, and they give up 130 yards passing. That's fourth. So they are the #1 defense in the country. Now, as we talked about, Ohio State kind of starts off a little slow. Was even behind against Akron. If Oregon gets off to, has their track shoes on and gets off to a 14-0 start, how does Ohio State respond? I happen to think they'll probably respond well. But nonetheless, Oregon's offense, it's not those old Oregon offenses where they're piling up 500, 600 yards a game and 50 points against Pac-12 competition. Their rush game is kind of average, about 167 yards per game. Pass game is 19th in the country at 294 yards, 26th overall. I don't think they have enough firepower to be able to hang with Ohio State, but I'll say this about this Oregon team: the defense is really good. It's a top 10 defense. They're 24th against the rush, 18th against the pass. They do a pretty good job. I've kind of been downplaying the Pac-12 as a physical defensive kind of conference, but USC and Oregon are doing better than expected on defense. So this could be a game where Ohio State wins 45-30. But would I be shocked if Oregon gets a late cover, scores late, it's 37-34? No, I wouldn't be. So that will be a game that attracts a lot of eyeballs, unlike this one. Rutgers versus Wisconsin here in Piscataway, New Jersey. Won't go into too much detail on this one because I will have a Wisconsin-Rutgers preview. And as I briefly mentioned, a lot of Rutgers fans have checked this off as a Rutgers win. It's not the same team, yada, 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 nonsense. Wisconsin kind of found their footing a little bit last week, even if it's against a bad Purdue team. When you put up 600 yards and 52 points against any Big Ten team, and you're not Ohio State, that's a pretty good job. You kind of want to do the same thing. We want to run the ball, play defense, and we wanted to commit this year to Luke Fickell. Brings in Longo from North Carolina to improve the pass offense. We bring in Ethan Kaliakamanis from Minnesota to help improve an anemic, inept pass offense the past 3 years. Not to bang on Gavin Wimsatt a lot. He's in Kentucky now, and good luck to him. But you can't win even in the Big Ten when you're a 47% completion guy. And last year, we lost 23-14, I believe, is the score. And Gavin had 3 red zone picks last year against Ohio State, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all late in the red zone. The Wisconsin one was a pick 6 that totally changed the trajectory of the game around. We went from a winnable game to losing the game. I don't believe we'll have that issue this year. We're going to have more balance. But nonetheless, I'll have a more detailed breakdown of the Wisconsin Badgers versus the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Everybody enjoy your week. Enjoy Big Ten football, and we will see you the next time.